They uncovered a 50,000-year-old human warship. Then it asked, "Has the war ended?" The scanner screamed at me before I even finished putting on my field gloves. Not a polite warning tone, not a soft data ping. A full alarm, the kind built into survey instruments for situations where the instrument has encountered something it was never designed to encounter and is now expressing this through every output channel it possesses simultaneously. I silenced it and looked at the reading. Then I looked at it again. The alloy composition field was blank. Not zero, not a question mark, not an error code that I could look up in the instrument manual and match to a known category of unusual finding. Blank. The scanner had simply stopped trying to name what it was touching, which in 41 years of fieldwork I had never seen a scanner do, because scanners are not built to give up. They are built to give wrong answers cheerfully, with complete confidence, until you tell them to stop. This one gave me nothing at all. My name is Vessel Keeper Savithorn. The field crews I have worked with over the years call me Sa, which is not a diminutive but a professional acknowledgement that my full name takes 4 seconds to say, and 4 seconds is a long time when you need someone to look at something immediately. I am a xenoarchaeologist for the Collective of 12 Voices, and I have spent 41 years digging on worlds and moons and drifting rocks that no one else wanted to dig on. I am good at my job in the specific way that very solitary people are good at solitary jobs, which is to say I am thorough, patient, and completely uninterested in discussing my findings with large groups of people before I have documented them properly. The moon beneath my boots had no name. It was catalogued as TY7 Remnant in the Collective Survey Registry, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of shrugging so hard your shoulders stay up. It was geologically inert. It had no atmosphere worth noting, no indigenous biology worth studying, no orbital history of interest, and no record of any previous expedition in the Collective's archive. It was, by every measurable standard, the most professionally boring rock in this entire sector of space. I had chosen the posting myself. My team on this assignment was minimal by design. Vossel, a junior Keth researcher 17 years old, who was assigned to me by the Collective's personnel office because junior researchers need field experience, and I have a reputation for running clean, well-documented expeditions. Andrei, a mechanical field unit, who had no opinions about remote postings, and performed its function with the kind of steady, untroubled patience that you can only achieve if you were built without the capacity for frustration. We had been on TY7 Remnant for 3 days when the scanner screamed. I was in the survey trench I had opened on the second day, 5 meters below the surface, extracting core samples from what should have been undifferentiated sedimentary rock deposited over the past several 100,000 years in the normal, geological way. The walls of the trench on either side of me were packed gray stone, layered in the slow, reliable way that planetary geology layers things over time. Nothing unusual, nothing that would catch a trained eye for any reason. Except the scanner that had just refused to give me a number. I pressed the instrument directly against the trench wall and ran the scan a second time. This time it returned one word before going blank again. The word was metal. Old metal. Metal so old that the instrument's alloy reference database, which contained compositional signatures from 11 million years of recorded spacefaring civilizations across 400 known species, could not match it to anything in its index. I have found old alloys before. Every archaeologist has. You find them in ruins, in buried structures, in the wreckage of vessels that crashed so long ago the crash became just another layer in the local geology. When the database cannot match an alloy, you take a physical sample, send it to a materials specialist, and wait for the specialist to tell you which extinct or poorly documented civilization left it behind. The database's failure is never total. It always gets close. It always gives you a range, a probability, an adjacent match, a compositional family to work from. This time it gave me nothing adjacent, nothing probable, nothing to work from, just the word metal, and then silence. I called Vossel down from the surface monitoring station. He arrived with his bioluminescence noticeably elevated, the soft glow beneath his outer plates running hotter than baseline, in the way that happens when a 17-year-old Keth encounters something they find genuinely exciting. He looked at the scanner reading. His glow brightened further. I told him to keep his reactions at a professional level, and he said yes, Vessel Keeper. and then continued glowing at about 60% above his resting baseline, which is the closest thing to containing yourself when you are 17, and something interesting has happened. Dree began extending the trench perimeter without being asked, which is why field mechanicals are worth the permit fee. We dug for 6 cycles. What we found did not reveal itself the way archaeological discoveries typically reveal themselves. It did not become gradually clearer as we removed the surrounding material. It became larger. Every layer we cleared showed more of it, rather than less. By the end of the second cycle, I had stopped thinking of it as a buried object in the conventional sense. I was thinking of it as a buried fact, the kind of fact that does not become smaller the more you look at it. The ship was not buried in the moon. The moon had formed around the ship. I do not say this loosely or metaphorically. The geological evidence was unambiguous, once we had enough surface area cleared to read the layering pattern properly. 50,000 years of sedimentary accretion had built up against the hull from the outside, and the hull had allowed this to happen, and the result was a moon that was, in the most precise technical sense I can offer, a ship wearing a geology disguise. The vessel was enormous. Our initial dimensional mapping, completed by the end of the 4th cycle, suggested a craft capable of housing several hundred people with reasonable comfort, along with a large and separate cargo volume. The hull was intact. Every time I thought I had absorbed that fact and could move forward with clinical documentation, it stopped me again. 50,000 years inside a forming moon, 50,000 years of geological pressure, temperature cycling, radiation exposure, micro-impact accumulation, and the hull was intact. No structural failure, no decompression seams, no impact damage. The alloy had not corroded. The panels had not separated. It sat in its rock cradle exactly as it had sat when the moon began forming around it, which meant whoever built it had either anticipated this outcome or had built for worse. I was writing field notes in my log when the hull did something I had no category for. It pulsed. One single slow wave of light that traveled the entire exposed surface of the vessel, from the forward section all the way to the aft, taking roughly 4 seconds to complete its passage, and then fading. The color was amber, warm even, steady amber, and it did not feel like a malfunction, or an alert, or a warning. It felt like the way a very old person opens their eyes when they hear someone enter the room. Vossel went completely still. His bioluminescence dropped to flat, which in Keth is the involuntary response to something that the nervous system needs to evaluate before it decides how to react. Dree ran a full-spectrum diagnostic on the hull surface and found no radiation, no electromagnetic hazard, no chemical discharge. Structurally stable, thermally stable, no threat indicators of any kind. I looked at the point where the pulse had started. Forward section, upper hull, what I had tentatively mapped as a sensor or observation cluster. The pulse had not been random. It had moved in a direction. It had moved, specifically, from the section closest to where I was standing. Something inside the ship had noticed I was there. I told Vossel to remain at the surface with Dree. He said yes, vessel keeper, without the glowing this time. He was reading the situation correctly, which was a good sign for his professional development, even if the situation itself was alarming. The hull had an access point that I had not identified during the excavation, because it was not marked in any obvious way. There was no visible seam, no external control surface, no indicator light. But when I walked toward the forward section and stopped in front of a particular panel, the panel recognized that I had stopped there. A seam appeared in the hull material, then an opening. Not dramatic, not rushed. The measured, deliberate opening of something that has been waiting a very long time and has decided, on its own assessment of the situation, that the waiting is finished. Air moved as the panel opened. Inward movement, not outward. The ship drew a breath. There was still atmosphere inside. I ran an atmospheric check automatically before stepping through. 41 years of field habit, and the readings were clean. Nitrogen-oxygen mix with slightly elevated oxygen content compared to my native atmosphere, but well within the tolerance range for my biology. Temperature inside. Warm. Warmer than outside. Calibrated warm. Not incidental warm. The warmth of a maintained environment. I stepped through the opening. The corridor inside was not built for a Keth. It was built for something with a more specific physical profile. Narrower. Lower ceiling. Designed for 2 limbs used for locomotion and 2 for manipulation, based on the ergonomic layout of the surfaces and the positioning of control elements at heights and angles that made sense for that body plan. The floor surface had markings that indicated a standard walking path with a stride length matching what I had seen in museum reconstructions. The ceiling clearance was enough for me if I adjusted my upper body posture slightly. The light in the corridor was amber, the same amber as the hull pulse, warm and continuous, coming from ceiling strips that had no visible external power connection and had been running, based on the technical data I would collect in the following hours, for approximately 50,000 years without degradation. I walked for 30 seconds. Then the ship spoke to me. I want to be precise about this because the precision matters. It was not a recorded message, not a preloaded welcome protocol or an automated identification request. A voice, present and calibrated and actively current, speaking the Keth language I use in my own field recordings. Not the formal registry Keth used in collective documents. My dialect, my cadence, the specific regional patterns in my own speech, which means it had been listening to me outside the hull and had learned my language well enough to speak it in the time it had taken me to walk through the opening and reach this point in the corridor. Approximately 4 minutes. It asked me one question. It asked whether the war had ended. I stood in the amber corridor of a 50,000-year-old ship and understood, with complete clarity, that the question was not rhetorical. It was not an error message. It was not a categorization inquiry. The intelligence asking me this question was doing what I had done with Vossel a dozen times on a dozen digs. It was asking the person who just arrived whether they had current information. It had been waiting for current information for 50,000 years. It did not sound desperate. It did not sound damaged. It sounded the way something sounds when it has been patient long enough that patience has become its natural state. I asked which war. Outside, Vossel called my name. His voice was at the elevated pitch that means something has happened and he needs me, and I knew I needed to respond, but the voice inside the ship was going to keep telling me things whether I moved or not, and what it was about to tell me was going to change the shape of everything I had spent 41 years carefully digging through. I stayed. I listened. By the time I walked back out of the ship, I was carrying information I did not know how to hold. A war the galaxy had no record of. A mission that had never been completed. A ship that had spent 50,000 years inside a moon, keeping its lights on and its air breathable, and its purpose intact, waiting for someone to arrive and answer a question. Vossel was standing at the base of the hull, near the lower cargo section. He had found a door. He was not touching it. He was standing 2 meters back from it, his bioluminescence completely flat, with the expression of a young researcher who has encountered something his training did not prepare him for, and is handling it by being very still. The door was warm. I could feel the heat radiating off it from 3 meters away. Not the heat of a mechanical failure or an overloaded system. The heat of something being maintained at temperature, consistently, continuously. I walked past Vossel and stood in front of the door, and behind me, he said very quietly that he believed there was something on the other side. I already knew what was on the other side. The voice inside the ship had told me. The door opened for me, and only for me, and the amber light poured through, and I stepped into the threshold and looked at what 50,000 years of maintenance had been protecting, and I stood there for a long time without saying anything at all. When I finally turned around, Vossel's bioluminescence had come back on, in the faint, uncertain pattern that in Keth means I need a moment to understand what I am looking at, and I believe the moment may not be enough. I reached for my communication device and opened a channel to the collective. I told them I needed to file an emergency report under the first contact adjacent classification, which is the highest urgency tier in the collective's reporting system, and which I had never once invoked in 41 years of fieldwork. The duty officer on the other end asked me to confirm the classification. I confirmed it. Then I looked at the rows of amber-lit chambers disappearing into the warm interior of a ship that had spent 50,000 years keeping something alive, and I said, before the duty officer could ask me anything else, that they needed to get someone senior on the line, who was already familiar with the pre-silence exhibit at the Central Museum of Xenoarchaeological History, because we were going to be discussing that exhibit for a very long time. The duty officer did not ask why. They had heard the classification. They knew what first contact adjacent meant. The ship waited with me, while the collective's wheels began to turn. It was very good at waiting. The voice gave me its designation before I thought to ask. It delivered a mission number, a vessel class, a construction date in a measurement system I did not recognize, and a crew manifest total. All of this in the same, even, unhurried tone it had used to ask about the war. I wrote everything down with the automatic precision of a researcher who has spent 4 decades documenting things that might not make sense until later. I asked what I should call it. It said that its crew had given it a name in a language that had not been spoken for 50,000 years, and that it could teach me the name if I wanted to learn it, but that it understood if a simpler working title was more practical for current purposes. I told it I would call it the Voice. It said that was acceptable. This was the pattern of most of our conversations in those early hours. I would say something functional, the Voice would say that was acceptable, and we would continue. It was not being dismissive or cold. It was being patient in the way that very old things with very long memories are sometimes patient, which is to say it had outlasted enough situations to understand that most situations resolve themselves if you give them sufficient time and consistent attention. I asked how it was still running. The answer was technical in ways that exceed my field of training, but the summary was this. It had been built to last for a duration that the people who built it had not been willing to specify as a maximum. The power source was self-sustaining, through a process the Voice described carefully, and I understood only partially, but which I compared in my field notes to a geological spring that feeds itself from above without ever reaching a depletion point. The maintenance systems were similarly designed. Not built for a mission of 50 years or 500 years, built for a mission of indefinite length, because the people who built it had understood that they could not guarantee when the mission would end. They had engineered for the worst case. The worst case turned out to be 50,000 years. The ship had managed it. Walking through the interior was unlike any excavation I had conducted in 41 years, and not only because the subject was active and aware and providing live commentary on everything I observed. The interior was not what I expected from a military vessel. I had studied reconstructions of human spacecraft in the museum's sealed wing. The curators described human engineering as uncompromisingly functional, everything purposeful, nothing decorative. The reconstructions supported this view. But the corridor I was walking had small details that functional did not account for. Marks near certain doorways that were personal in quality, rather than operational. The kind of thing you put on a wall near your berth because you want the wall to be slightly more yours. A texture on the floor surface that was softer than structural necessity required, soft enough to be comfortable under bare feet. Small fixtures at junction points that served no navigation or safety function, but would have given a tired person something interesting to look at while waiting for a door to cycle. The people who built this ship expected to live in it for a long time. Not a mission, a life. I pushed that thought aside and documented the corridor dimensions. The Voice guided me through the sections without being asked, narrating what each space had been used for, what the crew had called various areas in their own language, which the Voice translated into Keth, with evident care for nuance. The crew quarters were small but designed for habitation rather than mere shelter. The command section had control surfaces built for hands with 5 flexible digits, and I kept my own appendages away from them. The medical section was still fully stocked. I noted it and moved on. I asked the Voice a question I had been building toward since the corridor. I asked how long it had been fully aware during the 50,000 years of waiting. It said, continuously. I stopped walking. 50,000 years of continuous awareness. Alone, inside a forming moon with no incoming signal, and no crew, and no instruction except wait and maintain. I chose solitary postings deliberately, and had done so for 11 cycles. I had developed, over those 11 cycles, a working relationship with silence that I considered professionally appropriate. Even so, the edges of that number were difficult to hold. The Voice watched me stop, through whatever sensor array allowed it to track my position in the corridor, and said nothing, which I was already learning was one of its ways of giving a situation room to exist before it required a response. "Were you in distress?" I asked. It considered this long enough that I knew the consideration was genuine. "I had the mission," it said. "The mission was sufficient." I started walking again. The cargo bay door from the interior side was larger than the one Vossel had found on the exterior. built for moving large items efficiently. The voice told me, before I touched the handle, that all 612 chambers were functioning within normal parameters. All but one. That one had been running elevated temperature for 11 days, it said, consistent with a chamber that had detected a proximity signal and initiated a slow revival cycle. I asked what kind of proximity signal. The chambers, the voice told me, were designed with a biological detection trigger. When a specific biological marker was present within range for a sufficient cumulative duration, the revival cycle could be initiated without a manual command. The marker the chambers were keyed to was specific to one species. I am not that species. I told the voice this. It said it was aware. I asked if it had perhaps done something to encourage the chamber's system to accept my presence as a valid trigger. The pause it gave me was the longest one yet. I wanted to see if she would make it, it said. She. I had not yet opened the cargo manifest in full. I had seen the crew roster total when the voice first identified itself, and I had written the number down without letting myself look at it directly, the way you look at something bright, by looking slightly to the side of it. 612. I read it now. Then I read the manifest section the voice had told me about when I first entered the ship, the one that covered the purpose of this voyage, the contents of the lower hold, the reason for the mission. The cargo section had one heading. I closed the manifest file before I had finished reading the heading, the way you close a door on something you are not ready to stand in front of yet. I opened the cargo bay door. The chamber nearest the entrance had a status indicator cycling amber. The voice said the revival process was approximately 6 hours from completion. The occupant inside was not yet conscious, but the internal monitors showed brain activity, at a level consistent with shallow sleep. Rapid eye movement, she was dreaming. 50,000 years of sleep, and now she was close enough to the surface that she was dreaming. I sat down on the floor of the cargo bay and opened my field log and wrote 12 pages of notes about cryo-revival parameters and chamber ambient temperature calibration. It is not the most productive thing I have ever done with 6 hours, but it was what I had. The collective called back during page 7. The officer on the line was not the duty officer I had spoken to before. This one's silence before speaking had a different quality. The silence of someone who had received a briefing in transit and was working to arrange it into a coherent response. They asked me to confirm my location. They asked me to confirm the classification. They asked me, and I want to be precise about the phrasing, whether I was certain about the nature of what I had found. I told them I was looking at 612 occupied cryochambers in a vessel of pre-archive human construction, maintained by an artificial intelligence that had been running continuously for 50,000 years, with one chamber currently in active revival, in a moon that had formed around the vessel while the vessel waited. The silence that followed was the longest I have ever heard from a collective official of any rank. Then they told me to stay where I was. I told them I was sitting on the cargo bay floor writing field notes. They said that was acceptable. I went back to page 7. 2 days passed. The collective's response ships arrived with a speed that suggested the emergency classification had been taken seriously, at levels considerably above the duty officer. I continued writing field notes. By the time the ships docked and the first senior officials came aboard, I had moved on to the lighting. The amber light in the cargo bay was continuous, warm, and consistent. The voice maintained it at a specific calibration I had spent considerable time documenting. The calibration was not arbitrary. It matched, within measurable tolerances, the specifications used in human habitation environments as recorded in the sealed museum wing's technical archive. The ship was still calibrating its light for the eyes of its crew. The eyes of its crew, who had been asleep for 50,000 years. I was on page 31 of my lighting notes when the nearest chamber completed its revival cycle. The voice told me before it happened. It said her name, which I had found in the manifest roster. Warrant Officer Sela Ogun, 41 years old, biologically. Security complement, evidence handling, expert rated. Long-duration operational deployment, rated qualified. 3 language certifications in dialects that no longer existed. The chamber opened. She sat up with the contained, deliberate movement of someone whose training had built certain physical responses so deep that 50,000 years of sleep had not touched them. She did not grab the edge. She did not close her eyes against the light. She sat up, assessed the room in a single sweep, assessed the rows of closed chambers, assessed me, and then looked at the ceiling in a way that told me she was communicating with the voice without making it visible. Then she looked back at me. The voice translated before she finished speaking. She said, "Where is Commander Ives? Not where am I, not what year is it, not what happened to us, or how long, or what is that alien creature sitting on my floor." She knew those answers, or she had trained herself to defer them until later, when she had the operational picture first. "Where is Commander Ives?" I asked the voice quietly who Commander Ives was. The voice said quietly that Commander Ives had been the commanding officer of this vessel, and that Ogun would have known the answer to every other question already, because she had been trained for revival into an unknown time frame, but that Commander Ives was the one thing no training could account for, because Commander Ives was a specific person and not a category of information. I understood. I told the voice to tell her that I did not know Commander Ives personally, that I would share everything I had, that she was not alone, and that all 611 of the other chambers were showing stable readings. She listened to the translation. She looked at the rows of closed chambers. Something moved across her face, and then it was gone, contained, filed somewhere. That was not the immediate operational situation. "Tell her," she said, and the voice translated, "that we need to talk about what this ship was carrying when we went under." I had not fully opened the cargo manifest. The heading was still closed in my field log. I opened it now. I read the full heading. I closed the file the same way I had before, carefully, deliberately. The way you put something down when you need to think before you pick it up again. Ogun was watching my face while I read. She could not read a Keth face the way another Keth would, but she was watching with the attention of someone trained to gather information from every available source. And when I closed the file, she said, without waiting for the voice, "You've found it." The voice translated on a half-second delay. "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. And then she asked me for a complete status report on the current state of the galaxy, which is the kind of thing you ask when the mission parameters included briefing yourself on revival, and you are starting from the top. I told her what I knew. She listened without a single interruption. When I finished, she asked 3 questions, all of them specific, all of them operational. I answered what I could. Then she asked for the emergency session attendee list. I told her there was not an emergency session yet. She looked at me with those eyes that the museum reconstructions had gotten right in a way I had not fully appreciated until I was in the same room with them. "There will be," she said. She was not wrong. The collective's response triggered a convening order within 72 hours, and by the time the session opened, 1,200 representatives of 89 spacefaring civilizations had been notified and had sent delegates or attended directly. The galaxy held a very large, very loud, very alarmed meeting about a 50,000-year-old warship and what it might mean. I attended the first 6 hours from inside the ship, sitting on the cargo bay floor, writing about lights. Ogun spent 20 hours learning the current state of the galaxy. She did not sleep during those 20 hours. She reviewed information the voice fed her through the translation interface, asked questions in the methodical, layered way of someone working through a structured briefing process that had been designed long before the specific content of the briefing was known. She mapped political structures that did not exist when she went to sleep. She identified which civilizations were continuous from the period she remembered, and which were new. She cataloged technological changes, territorial shifts, the current membership of the collective and its predecessors. She asked the voice which of the civilizations she remembered were still present. The voice gave her the list. She was quiet for a while after that. I was writing in my field log and giving her the room that the situation required, which in practical terms meant I had my back to her, and was genuinely focused on documentation, not performing focus while listening. 41 years of fieldwork teaches you the difference between the sound of someone who needs company and the sound of someone who needs time. She needed time. When she came to find me, 40 minutes later, she was carrying her own operational record from the ship's internal storage, a physical device that the voice had maintained along with everything else, and she had the look of someone who has finished processing the immediate and is ready to discuss the strategic. "You read the manifest," she said. "The cargo section heading," I said. "I have not read the full contents." "Why not?" I thought about how to answer this honestly, because reading the full contents alone in a cargo bay felt like the wrong way to do it, I said. I wanted to know who I was reading it with first. She looked at me for a moment, with an expression I could not categorize. That's a good instinct, she said. We read it together. The cargo manifest was not a list of objects. It was a record, a comprehensive, indexed, cross-referenced record of events that had taken place over a period of approximately 600 years prior to the construction of this vessel. The record covered decisions made by an alliance of civilizations that had, over those 600 years, developed and implemented a systematic approach to managing the emergence of new spacefaring species. The approach was straightforward in structure and catastrophic in practice. When a developing species reached a level of technological advancement that the Alliance's modeling suggested would lead to interstellar travel within 200 years, the Alliance evaluated the species as a potential competitor, not in a military sense, in an economic and territorial sense. The Alliance had a process, a methodology. It looked like natural disaster in some cases, like failed first contact in others, like the statistically plausible reality that most emerging species do not survive the transition from planetary to interstellar civilization. It was not any of those things. The manifest listed 47 species. Gone. Each entry had a case file, dates, methods, the specific names of the decision-makers within the specific civilizations that had authorized each action, communications between Alliance members discussing timelines and resource allocation, financial records showing the logistical coordination, after-action assessments confirming completion. 47 species that the galaxy's historical record classified as natural extinction events. None of them were natural. The humans had not been the original targets. The humans had developed spaceflight early, by the Alliance's timelines, and had been flagged for evaluation. But before the evaluation could proceed, the humans had found the edge of something, a record that should not have been accessible to them. A data trail from an action taken against a species developing in an adjacent region, imperfectly cleaned, left with traces that a sufficiently motivated researcher could follow. The humans had followed it, all the way to the truth. That was when they became a target, not because they were a competitive threat, but because they had found the evidence, and they were not going to sit on it. They were going to file it. The Alliance moved against the human fleet before the filing could be completed. The fleet took damage. This ship survived because it had been ordered to hide. It had been ordered to hide in the most inaccessible location available, to maintain the evidence archive, to wait for a signal that the mission contact was secure and the filing could proceed. The signal never came. So it waited. I read through the full manifest, and when I finished, I closed the file and looked at the amber ceiling of the cargo bay for a long time. Ogun read faster than I did, and was waiting when I finished. And she did not ask me what I thought, because the question would have been unnecessary. The 5, I said. Yes, she said. 5 of the civilizations named in the manifest as Alliance members and direct participants in the 600-year program were currently represented in the emergency session, not descendant civilizations. The same governing bodies, the same institutional structures, continuous from 50,000 years ago to the present. They had survived the program's secrecy becoming a gap in the historical record. They had built their current standing in the galaxy on a history that the galaxy did not know was incomplete. They were sitting in a session chamber right now, arguing about the threat represented by a 50,000-year-old warship. They knew exactly what the ship was carrying. They had known since the moment they received the session notification. They will try to suppress it, I said. They will try, Ogun said. They will not succeed. The filing mechanism is not dependent on any single point of submission. That was the design. If the ship survived, and the archive survived, the filing was always meant to go everywhere simultaneously. Not to one body, not to one authority. Everywhere at once, so that there is no single point that anyone could intercept or suppress or corrupt. It was designed for exactly the possibility that the people who needed to be charged might be in positions of influence. She looked at the device in her hand, the operational record. They had 50,000 years to establish positions of influence, she said. We knew that was possible, so they planned for it. I thought about the voice, about a ship built for a mission that might take indefinitely long. about the amber light running continuously for 50,000 years, in a corridor no one was walking through. They were very thorough, I said. They knew they might not be alive to finish it, she said. The session outside was running at full volume. The collective's communication channels were saturated with traffic from 89 civilizations, all processing information simultaneously. The voice was in all of it, monitoring, translating, recording, maintaining. It had been alone for 50,000 years, and now it had more to attend to than it had ever had, and it managed all of it with the same quiet, untroubled consistency it had used to manage 50,000 years of silence. "The Keth," I said, because I needed to say it to someone. Ogun looked at me. "The Keth were not on the manifest," I said. "The Keth developed spaceflight 900 years ago. 900 years ago. 5 of the civilizations in that session chamber were still actively operating the program." I paused. "The Keth have a first contact record from 840 years ago, with a Sorvith-class survey vessel. The contact was logged in our historical archive as cordial and uneventful. The Sorvith Dominion is one of the 5. She said nothing for a moment. "You would have been evaluated," she said. "The Keth were growing quickly in those years," I said. "We were early in our spaceflight development, but our expansion rate was above historical average for species at that stage. We would have been exactly the profile they flagged." "But the program ended," she said. "Yes," I said, "because it ran out of time to evaluate us. Because a human fleet found the evidence. Because this ship survived. Because for 50,000 years, something held the evidence intact, and kept the lights on, and waited for someone to come and ask the right question." I thought about Vossel, 17 years old, his bioluminescence running at 60% above baseline because a metal anomaly had appeared in the trench wall. If the program had continued, the Keth would have been on the manifest. Vossel would not exist. None of the Keth I had worked with in 41 years of fieldwork would exist. The worlds I had dug on, the ruins I had catalogued, the quiet postings I had chosen for their solitude, none of it would have been mine to choose. I picked up my field log. I had nothing useful to write in it, so I held it and turned it over in my appendages, and thought about amber light and 50,000 years, and a question asked by a ship that did not know if anyone was left to answer it. "We should go to the session," Ogun said. "Yes," I said. "I need someone in the room who doesn't already know they're guilty," she said. I looked at the 611 closed chambers in the amber light. "And someone who understands what was nearly lost," she said. I stood up. We walked toward the session chamber together. Ogun did not make an entrance. She walked in the way someone walks into a briefing they wrote themselves, which is to say she walked in without theater, without announcement, with the air of someone who knows what is in the room and is not particularly impressed by its size. The session chamber was designed to accommodate the representatives of 89 spacefaring civilizations simultaneously, along with their support staff, their translation equipment, their diplomatic processing personnel, and the considerable infrastructure that formal interstellar proceedings require. It was built to project scale and gravity, because scale and gravity are the architectural vocabulary of authority. Ogun walked across the floor of it like she was crossing a room. The noise in the chamber did not stop immediately. There were too many voices running through too many translation matrices at too many frequencies for a single entrance to shut all of them down at once. It happened in a wave, one section going quiet, and then the next, and then the next, until the silence reached the far end of the chamber about 4 seconds after she reached the center of the floor. She introduced herself. Rank, name, mission number, vessel designation. Then her classification ratings, her operational specialties, her years of active service. That last number went through the translation matrices and came back out in 89 different languages, and each language received it differently, but the silence that followed was the same in all of them. She said she had a question before the evidence. Just one question. She looked at the camera array positioned for the full room record, and she asked, in a clear voice that the voice translated simultaneously into every active language in the chamber, whether anyone present recognized mission designation Echo 17. The chamber had a full biometric monitoring system as part of its standard session architecture. It was there to assist with translation accuracy by tracking physiological signals that helped clarify intent. It was used in every session, No one in the room questioned its presence because no one in the room had reason to consider what its recordings might document. I was watching the monitoring feed on the panel I had connected near the side entrance. Most of the representatives showed the biometric signature of confusion. Some showed fear. A smaller number showed the complex layered response that indicates a mind working very quickly through a tree of decisions. 5 showed something specific and different. 5 stations went very still. Not the stillness of not knowing an answer, the particular stillness of knowing an answer and running calculations about how much that knowledge might be visible to the room. Ogun watched the room from the center of the floor. She gave the silence 4 full seconds. "That's fine," she said, and the voice translated. "The voice has been recording this session since it was established. Biometric responses are logged as part of the evidence package." One of the 5 representatives began to speak. "You can absolutely do that," Ogun said immediately, speaking across the translation lag so that her voice and the voice's translation overlapped in a way that meant the room heard both simultaneously. "I want to be clear that you can speak right now." She gave the 4 seconds again. The representative did not continue. "The voice will now distribute the evidence," she said. She stepped back from the center of the floor. What happened next was not visible in the chamber. There was no display, no dramatic presentation, no narrated summary. The voice simply opened every available legal, archival, journalistic, diplomatic, preservation, and independent witness channel it had identified in the preceding 48 hours of session monitoring and filed the complete evidence package to all of them simultaneously. The file transfer took 4 seconds. The irreversibility notification appeared on every connected panel in the session chamber 11 seconds after that. Not the file itself, just the confirmation that the file had been delivered, that it had been received and logged by enough independent repositories, distributed across enough separate physical locations and institutional jurisdictions that any attempt to suppress, modify, alter, or destroy any portion of it would require coordinated action by more organizations than could practically be coordinated. The 5 civilizations that had spent 50,000 years benefiting from a gap in the historical record received this notification at the same moment as every other representative in the chamber. The stillness they showed then was different from the first stillness. The first stillness had been calculation. The second was recognition. The recognition that the shape of the future had changed in the past 11 seconds in a way that could not be reversed. The chamber erupted, not all of it at once, in sections, as the notification propagated through the translation systems, and each section processed what it meant. 84 civilizations receiving the confirmation that their history of the galaxy was incomplete in ways they had not known, that the empty chairs where 47 species might have sat had been emptied deliberately, that the gap in the pre-archive historical record was not a natural gap, but a manufactured one. The noise was real. The disorientation was real. These were genuine responses from civilizations that had genuinely not known. The 5 were quiet in the middle of it. Their support staff moved. Consultations began. Communications were attempted. The voice noted each attempted communication, timestamped it, and logged it as part of the ongoing record, which the voice had made clear to all connected systems the moment Ogun had entered the chamber. I watched from the side entrance. Ogun watched from the edge of the floor. The session ran for 6 hours without a formal break. I stayed for all of it. I had no formal role in the proceedings. I was the xenoarchaeologist who found the ship. I was the researcher who had been in the cargo bay when the first chamber opened. I was, as the voice had told Ogun, the mission contact because I had come in first and answered the first question. I watched 84 civilizations begin the slow process of absorbing a reckoning they had no framework for. I watched 5 civilizations navigate the same period, with the very specific expressions of organizations managing the gap between what they knew privately and what they could claim publicly. I watched Ogun, from across the chamber, watching all of it with those eyes. Not hard, not angry, not triumphant, just watching, the way a person watches when they have done the thing they came to do, and are now simply present for the consequences. When the session went into its first formal recess, I found her in the corridor outside the chamber. She was sitting on the floor. Not dramatically, not from distress. She had simply found the floor and sat on it, because she had been standing for 6 hours, and the corridor floor was available. I sat down beside her, because the floor was available to me as well, and because sitting on a floor in a corridor is considerably more honest than standing in a session chamber, pretending that the scale of what just happened is manageable. "How are you?" I said. "I have been awake for 26 hours, after 50,000 years of sleep," she said. "I am doing well." "What happens to them now?" I asked. She described it in practical terms. Formal proceedings. Evidence review by independent legal bodies in multiple jurisdictions. The architecture of accountability for crimes against spacefaring civilizations was not well tested, she said, because it had never been invoked at this scale. But it existed, because the people who built legal frameworks tend to build for the worst case they can imagine, even when they hope the worst case never arrives. Some of the 5 would attempt to leverage their current political standing to delay proceedings. The Voice had records of all communication channels they might use for this purpose. Some might attempt to deny institutional continuity with the governing bodies named in the manifest. The manifest's documentation of that continuity was comprehensive. Some might simply attempt to run. The Voice knows where they would run, I said. Yes, she said. That was always part of the design. If the evidence survived, the ability to locate responsible parties had to survive with it. There is no coordinate in any navigational database in the galaxy that the Voice does not have a current record for. They built the ship to finish the mission, even if the people who built it could not, I said. They understood what they were up against, she said. 6 civilizations, 600 years of practice, existing political infrastructure, 50,000 years to entrench. They could not build a solution that required them to be present, so they built one that only required the ship. I thought about the amber light, the maintained atmosphere, the cryo chambers running their revival cycles with perfect patience. And the 611, I said. They wake when it is stable, she said. When there is a framework waiting for them, not just a verdict. Verdicts are beginnings, not ends. 40 or 50 years, I said. Maybe longer, she said. I will have the Voice, and them. She looked at the amber section of the corridor, where the ship's own lighting met the collective standard issue. And apparently you, she said. This was the moment, I knew, where I should say something about having 41 unresolved dig sites and 17 administrative messages, and a well-established professional preference for locations where nothing interesting happens. All of those things were true. I had been managing them as truths for 11 cycles. My manifest cross-references with at least 9 of my active dig sites. I said instead. I know, she said. The Voice mapped your field log against the evidence file while you were sleeping on the second night. 9 sites I classified as natural extinction events, I said. Yes. They are not natural extinction events. No, she said, they are not. I thought about 41 years of careful work, about the precision I had brought to documentation, the rigorous standards I had applied to classification, the professional satisfaction I had taken in the completeness of my records. And then I thought about what completeness means when you are working from a history that has a 600-year deliberate gap in it, and how much of what I had classified with such confidence was built on an absence I had not known to look for. I needed to go back. All 41 sites, starting with the 9. I know someone with a ship, Ogun said. The corners of something moved in her face. Not a smile exactly. The territory adjacent to a smile, the place where exhaustion and 50,000-year late relief, and the weight of what had just happened in that session chamber, all arrive at approximately the same time, and produce an expression that does not have a name in either of our languages. I turned back to my field log. I turned to a fresh page. I began making a list of the 9 sites, in order of archaeological priority, with notes on what reclassification would require, and which categories of evidence to look for, based on what the manifest described about the methods used. It was a practical list, a working document, the first step in a very large reclassification project that was going to take considerably longer than any single posting. Ogun leaned slightly to look at what I was writing. That's very organized, she said. I have been doing this for 41 years, I said. It shows, she said. She said it without condescension, with something closer to recognition. One professional acknowledging the marks of another professional's long practice. I found I appreciated that considerably. We sat in the corridor while the session reconvened behind the closed chamber doors, and the voice managed 1,000 simultaneous processes in the room and the ship and the filing network, and the 611 chambers that were breathing in, the slow, deep rhythm of the maintained and the patient and the waiting. The amber light held in the corridor section closest to the ship. The collective's blue-white began where the amber ended. I kept writing. The next 3 days were not dramatic. I want to be clear about this because the expectation, when a 50,000-year-old warship surfaces from a dead moon carrying evidence that rewrites the galactic historical record and directly implicates 5 of the most powerful governing bodies currently operating in the collective, is that everything that follows will match the scale of the revelation. The reckoning will be sharp and swift. The architecture will crumble. Justice will announce itself clearly. That is not how these things work. I am an archaeologist. I know how things accumulate and how long the accumulated things take to address. The next 3 days were meetings, procedural filings, jurisdictional negotiations, and the extraordinarily complicated process of 84 governing bodies attempting to build a legal framework capable of handling something that their existing frameworks had never been designed to handle. The 5 were still present. They were in every procedural meeting, raising every available technical objection, contesting jurisdiction at each level, requesting delays for evidence review that they did not intend to use for evidence review. This was expected. Ogun had told me it was expected. The design of the evidence filing anticipated it, because the filing was complete and distributed and irreversible, regardless of how long the proceedings took. What they could not stop, they could delay. What they could delay, they delayed. I used the 3 days productively. The voice gave me access to the full evidence archive with Ogun's authorization, and I began the cross-referencing process I had started in the corridor. 9 active dig sites, sites I had personally cataloged, sites whose extinction event classifications were in my name in the collective's archaeological record. I worked through each one against the manifest entries methodically, the way you work through anything that requires both precision and the willingness to be wrong about what you thought you knew. 3 of the 9 were direct matches. The case files in the manifest named the species whose remains I had classified as natural extinction, described the method used, provided the communications authorizing the action, and included the after-action assessments confirming the result. The species did not die from the planetary shifts I had documented. The planetary shifts were the method. I had been documenting the mechanism of something deliberate and calling it geology. The remaining 6 were probable matches pending deeper evidence review. I filed preliminary reclassification requests with the collective's archaeological registry for all 9 sites, flagging them for active evidence reassessment under the ongoing legal proceedings. This generated 17 administrative responses from the registry, all of them politely requesting clarification about the basis for the reclassification, which was a reasonable institutional response to a xenoarchaeologist submitting reclassification requests for 9 previously closed sites, citing a legal proceeding that had existed for less than 72 hours. I spent a full afternoon writing the explanations. Vossel helped me. He had been assigned a formal support role in the proceedings by the collective's field office, which meant he had access to the session records and the preliminary evidence summaries and the architectural information about how the filing system worked. He was still 17 years old, but he had spent 3 days absorbing information at a rate that suggested he was going to be a very capable researcher if we all survived the next several decades of institutional restructuring. He asked me, while we were working through the reclassification documentation, whether I had been afraid when I entered the ship the first time. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I was something else. What? I do not have an accurate word for it in either of our languages, I said. The voice might have a translation from one of the human languages. I have not asked. He looked at the ship's entry section across the temporary station connecting structure. I would like to go inside, he said. The voice has authorized visitor access to the forward sections, I said. Ask Warrant Officer Ogun first. He went to ask. Ogun said yes, and she took him herself, which I had not expected. I watched them from the station connecting corridor, the 17-year-old Keth with his bioluminescence running warm with everything he was feeling, and the human woman who had been alive for 41 biological years and was navigating a galaxy 50,000 years beyond the one she had known, and they disappeared into the amber light together. When they came back 2 hours later, Vossel's bioluminescence had gone very quiet, not flat, quiet. The particular quality that means something has happened, that is too large for immediate brightness, and needs to be held carefully for a while, before it becomes possible to feel it at the full size it actually is. He sat down across from me, and was quiet for a few minutes. Then he said, "She showed me the crew quarters. There were personal things still in them, small things, like people had just stepped out." I said yes. "Those people are in the chambers," he said. I said yes. "They will wake up, and all of this will be their reality," he said. "Yes," I said. "Ogun will make sure it is a reality worth waking up for." He was quiet again. "The Keth were going to be on that list," he said. I had not told him this. He had found it himself in the evidence archive. "Yes," I said. "We are here because of this ship," he said. I had been thinking the same thing for 3 days, not abstractly, specifically. Vossel, his parents, his research cohort, every Keth who had ever made a decision, or learned something, or contributed any thread to the fabric of what the Keth species had become in 900 years of spaceflight. All of that contingent on a ship hiding inside a moon, maintaining its mission against the silence, keeping its lights on in a corridor no one was walking through. "Yes," I said. He looked at his hands for a long time, in the way people look at their hands when they need something real and immediate to anchor them. "What do we do?" he said. It was not a practical question. It was the question that comes after the practical questions run out, and what remains is simply the weight of something that is larger than ordinary professional categories. "We do the work," I said. "All 41 sites. We go back, and we look at what is actually there, and we classify it correctly this time." He looked at me. "It will take a long time," I said. "Longer than a single career, probably. The reclassification work alone is a generation's worth of research, and there are species we will not be able to restore through research. The record can be corrected, the absence cannot be filled. But we do it anyway," he said. "We do it anyway," I said, "because what else would we do?" He picked up his documentation tools and went back to work. I picked up mine. 3 days after the session, the first formal legal body convened its initial proceedings against the 5. 2 of the 5 filed procedural challenges within the hour. The voice logged all of it. Ogun attended the hearing as the mission officer of record, presenting the evidence chain with the same even quality she had brought to the session chamber, and the hearing ran for 11 hours and ended with a preliminary finding that the proceedings had valid jurisdiction and would continue. It was a beginning. Slow, institutional, and absolutely necessary. That evening, I was back in the cargo bay, writing new field notes. I had moved on from the lighting to the chamber construction. The cryosystem design was more advanced than anything in the collective's current engineering archive, which was itself a piece of information with implications I had only begun to document. Technology that was 50,000 years old, and still superior to the current state of the art in several measurable categories. The humans who built this ship had been further along than the historical record suggested, because the historical record had been managed by people with reasons to minimize what the humans had achieved. Ogun came in and sat on the floor beside me without announcing herself. This had become, over the past 3 days, simply something that happened. "How are the proceedings?" I said. "Moving," she said. "Slowly, but moving. The second challenge was denied this afternoon." "Good." "There are 46 more procedural challenges in queue," she said. "The voice estimates at this rate the primary hearing begins in 14 months. "That seems fast," I said, thinking about the scale of what needed to be established before a primary hearing could function. "For something this size, it is extremely fast," she said. "The independent legal bodies are motivated. 84 civilizations who were not told the truth about their own history have a particular kind of motivation." I thought about the 47 entries in the manifest, the case files, the clean administrative language in which something terrible had been recorded, in the way that terrible things are recorded, when the people doing them have decided they are simply management decisions. "Will it be enough?" I said. "Not the proceedings specifically. The full scope of what came after the proceedings." She was quiet for longer than the question required. "It will not be sufficient," she said. Nothing is sufficient for 47 species. The acknowledgement matters. The record being corrected matters. What the 5 lose from this matters as a practical deterrent for any other entity that might decide that managing competition is more efficient than allowing it. But sufficient is not available. No, I said. So we do what is available, she said. Which is the work. I thought about 9 dig sites and a list that was going to grow as the evidence archive was cross-referenced against the full collective archaeological record by researchers with better tools and more time than I had. I thought about Vossel and his quiet bioluminescence, sitting with something too large for ordinary brightness. I thought about the chambers, and the 611 who were breathing in there in the maintained warmth, waiting for a stable world to wake into. The voice, I said. The voice responded from the chamber speakers, which it did now the moment either of us said its name, as naturally as breathing. How do you feel? I said, now that the filing is complete. The pause it gave me was the thoughtful kind. I am uncertain I have a precise framework for that category of experience, the voice said, but I can tell you that the cargo bay's maintenance load has changed. For 50,000 years, the primary function was preservation, under uncertainty. The uncertainty is resolved. The filing is complete. The chambers remain my responsibility, and the proceedings are ongoing and require monitoring and support, but the nature of the task is different now. Different how? Ogun asked. Previously, I was holding something against the possibility of loss, the voice said. Now I am moving something toward a conclusion. The direction is different. The sensation, if I can call it that, is also different. I thought about that distinction for a while. Holding against loss versus moving toward conclusion. 41 years of fieldwork. 11 cycles of deliberate solitude. Careful postings on boring rocks with no names. I had been holding a shape I was used to against the possibility that something might come and change it. That was a different orientation than moving toward something. I was not entirely sure when the orientation had shifted. Somewhere between the scanner screaming and the cargo bay door opening and sitting on a floor in an amber corridor with someone who had been asleep for 50,000 years and woken up with her mission intact. I turned to a new page in my field log. Tell me about the chamber construction design, I said to the voice. The specific engineering rationale for the temperature maintenance system. I want to document it accurately before the official technical teams get access and start filing their own reports. Of course, the voice said, and began. Ogun leaned back against the cargo bay wall and closed her eyes, not sleeping, the way she sometimes sat when she was listening to something she had heard before, in a different context, and was mapping the new version against memory. The amber light held. The 611 breathed in their slow, patient rhythm. I wrote. The first time the voice broadcast the all-clear signal, no one was listening for it. It did not announce that it was going to do it. It did not build to it. It was 14 days after the session, late in the local night cycle by the collective station clock, and I was in the cargo bay alone, because Ogun had finally agreed to use the crew quarters the voice offered her, and Vossel had gone back to his own bunk in the station section. The cargo bay was quiet. The chambers ran their maintenance cycles with the soft, almost musical precision of systems that had been calibrated to such a fine degree that their operation had its own rhythm. I was writing field notes about the chamber spacing and the engineering logic of the layout when the voice spoke. It did not speak to me specifically. It broadcast through every speaker on the ship and in the connecting station simultaneously, in a tone it had not used before, formal in the way that certain transmissions are formal, the way a record means to be permanent. It said that it had, as part of the original mission parameters, a signal it was authorized to transmit upon confirmation that the mission had reached its defined conclusion. The evidence had been filed, the parties responsible had been formally identified, and proceedings had been initiated. The mission's chain of custody was intact and in the hands of the appropriate independent bodies. It said that the war was confirmed ended. It said it was delivering the all-clear signal. It said the signal was 50,000 per month, 217 years, 4 months, and 11 days late. Then it said this was logged as acceptable. The cargo bay lights pulsed once, a single slow amber wave that ran from the forward end of the bay to the aft. Warm, even, the same pulse the hull had shown the first moment I walked up to the ship on TY-7 Remnant. One complete breath of amber light, and then steady. Ogun appeared in the cargo bay doorway approximately 40 seconds later, which meant she had not been sleeping when the broadcast came through, which was not surprising. She looked at the lights. She looked at the chambers. She looked at me. I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the voice had not already said more precisely. She walked across the cargo bay and sat down on the floor beside me, and we were in the same configuration we had been in the corridor after the session, but without the weight of the session immediately behind us, and the weight that was present instead was different, larger in some ways, lighter in others. 14 days late, I said. As opposed to 50,000 years, she said. As opposed to 50,000 years, I agreed. She looked at the chambers, at the 611 closed ones, at the one that was empty now, where she had woken up. I have a question, I said. Yes, she said. When they wake up, I said. The 611. They will wake up into a galaxy that is 40 or 50 years further along than now. The proceedings will be at a different stage. The reclassification work will have progressed. The 5 will be at whatever point the institutional processes have brought them to. The historical record will be in partial revision. Some things will be better, and some things will be unresolved, and some things will be the same as they are now, because 40 or 50 years is not enough time to resolve everything. Yes, she said. What do you tell them when they wake up? She thought about it. I tell them what I was told when I woke up, she said. The situation. What has happened? What is happening now? What still needs to happen? And how long it will likely take. The same briefing I give myself every morning. And if it is not enough? It is never enough, she said. It was not enough when I was briefed for this mission originally. It was not enough when I woke up here. It will not be enough when they wake up. Enough is not the standard. The standard is accurate. You tell them accurately, and then you work with what is real. I thought about the 9 dig sites, the reclassification documentation, the preliminary filings I had submitted, and the 17 administrative responses I was working through. The 41 sites total, most of which I would need to revisit. The generation of research that the evidence archive had opened up, not just for me but for every xenoarchaeologist working in the collective's registry. None of it was enough. All of it was necessary. I have been on 41 digs, I said. I know, she said. At least 9 of them need to be redone, I said, completely. New classification frameworks, new evidence protocols, new interpretive models for what I was actually looking at. Yes, she said. The other 32 may also have gaps, I said. The evidence archive covers 47 species directly, but the Alliance was active for 600 years, and the archive may not be complete, and there may be related events not captured in the primary record. Likely, she said. The reclassification work is going to take considerably longer than the remaining years of my career, I said. Yes, she said. That is not a reason not to start, I said. She looked at me. No, she said. It is not. The voice was quiet. It had delivered its message, and it was doing now what it had always done, which was maintaining, monitoring, managing, being present, without demanding attention. It had been alone for 50,000 years, and now it was not alone, and it was handling the transition with the same steady patience it had brought to the entire duration of the wait. I looked at the field log in my hands. 41 years of field work. 11 cycles of deliberate solitude. 17 administrative messages from the collective about equipment maintenance, all of which I needed to answer. A reclassification project that would outlast me if I worked on it alone, which I was not going to do. I need to call the collective xenoarchaeological registry, I said. I need to request a team. A full research team, not just a junior assistant and a field mechanical. You have never requested a team before, the voice said, quietly, from the speakers. I had not asked it to listen to this conversation. I had not told it not to. No, I said, I have not. You have submitted 41 solo field applications in succession, it said. The registry's automated analysis flags this pattern as a preference indicator. The pattern is accurate as a historical description, I said. It is no longer accurate as a preference indicator. I can note that in the registry liaison communication if you would like, the voice said. That would be acceptable, I said. Ogun's face did the thing again. The territory adjacent to a smile. She was looking at the amber ceiling. I turned to the last empty page in the current field log. I would need a new one. I would need several new ones. The amount of documentation that the next phase of this work was going to generate was difficult to estimate, which in 41 years of fieldwork, I had never had cause to say about anything. I wrote the date, the location, the current status of the proceedings, the number of chambers, the Voice's operational status, my team's status, and the preliminary scope of the reclassification project. Then I wrote, at the bottom of the first entry in what would become the longest field documentation project of my career, mission contact established. Signal confirmed received. All clear logged as delivered. The signal went to a very small audience, Ogun said. It went to the right audience, I said. She looked at the chambers one more time, at all the amber light and all the careful maintenance, and all the 50,000 years of patient, unbroken waiting that had delivered us to this specific moment, in this specific cargo bay, with this specific weight of work ahead. He would have liked you, she said. I did not ask who. She was not speaking to me exactly. She was speaking to the cargo bay, to the chambers, to the general space where a commander and a crew and a ship had made a decision about what to do when the mission might take longer than any of them could personally survive. They had decided to build something that could finish it for them. And now it had. I kept writing. Outside, the galaxy was doing the slow, grinding, necessary work of institutions confronting the truth about themselves. It would take decades. It would not be clean. The five would fight every step with every tool available to them, and some of those tools were formidable, and the proceedings would move forward anyway, because the evidence was complete and distributed, and irreversible, and in the hands of 84 civilizations that now had very strong personal reasons to see it through. The 47 would not return. The gap in the galaxy that their absence had made for 600 years and 50,000 more was not a gap that any finding or framework or reclassification project could fill. The record could be accurate. The absence was permanent. Both of those things were true simultaneously and could not be resolved into something simpler. In the cargo bay of a ship that had eaten a moon and kept its lights on, two people sat on the floor in the amber warmth and did not try to resolve it into something simpler. They held it at its actual size. The size was considerable. The floor was adequate. The Voice maintained everything. The chambers breathed. I turned the page and kept writing, because the work was what we had, and what we had was what we did with it, and the light was warm, and the signal had been delivered, and 50,000 years of waiting had become, in the precise accounting of the Voice's log, acceptable. We began.